this isn't magic, you know, it's just a lot of patience and trial and error and genuine interest. And I think as long as somebody wants to do something, they can noodle around in a code pen and they can make something pretty cool.
Hey everybody, welcome back to CSS Masters Talk. My name is Aitchison, with me is Elad Schechter, and today we're talking with an extremely talented developer, Suzanne Aitchison. I hope I'm saying it right. Hi Suzanne, thank you for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me, and well done. You said that exactly correctly, so that's better than most British people, so well done.
Great. Thank you. So before we dive into CSS, can you tell us a bit about yourself, maybe a few words about your work?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a software developer here in Edinburgh in Scotland. I specialize mostly in React development and like with a little bit of an eye on accessibility in particular. I'm a bootcamp graduate. So I went through a school called Code Clan in Scotland, which is a boot camp, but a little bit more like public sector ethos. It's not quite so aggressive on the money churning as a lot of the American style boot camps. Yeah, so I only got into coding about 4 or 5 years ago. And so I find myself here now doing software development and dabbling in CSS Art and accessibility and all sorts of things.
Talking about CSS Art, you have an amazing 100 days project that is still running, where you upload a new CSS image or CSS animation every day. I'm going to add some of these animations to the video so people could see the great work you do. And of course, there's links for everything in the description. But first of all, can you tell us about how it all began, how this project all began?
Yeah. So I'm not a natural artist in any way, shape, or form. I think part of the reason why I code is because I want to be creative, but I'm not, I can't paint, I can't draw, I've never had a natural talent for that, but I'm lucky to be surrounded by people who do. So, my partner's an illustrator. I've got a friend who's an amazing UX designer and like a graphic designer friend as well. And there's this project that runs every year across the summer in Scotland, this 100 Days project. And a few of those people sort of in my life have taken part before, sort of creating portraits every day for 100 days, or, graphic design images for 100 days, like loads of really cool stuff. And it just sort of occurred to me this year, like, maybe I could actually do something for this as well and like kind of contribute to this project in a different way, because when you look at the kind of projects people are doing as part of this umbrella of the Scotland 100 Days project, like a lot of it is that very hands-on, like it's painting, it's like watercolors. I mean, there's some really odd stuff, don't get me wrong. Like there's someone who's doing some art with tea bags. Very cool, very strange. So, I'm not a strange person in that equation, but I wanted to contribute something a little bit different to kind of show that, us coders who are just sitting at laptops all day, like we can create art too. And I kind of wanted to challenge myself to learn how to do that.
But why CSS? Like, why not JavaScript, Canvas? Why not SVG, for example?
Yeah, really for the joy of it. So I read this tweet the other day, I think it's someone called Chris Smith, and he said like the beauty of CSS Art is that there's no real commercial gain from it, like the beauty is that we're using the wrong tool for the job almost, like there's a lot of joy.
I think I saw this tweet.
Yeah, and I was like, that is spot on. Like, there's so much joy to be had from taking something that, like, to be honest, in the developer community, sometimes people are a little bit, like, dismissive of CSS sometimes. So to take something that's kind of spoken about in that way and kind of do something a bit different with it and show how creative it is really appealed to me.
So where do you get your inspiration from, or where do you get your ideas from? How do you decide what to draw each day?
I honestly don't know where the ideas come from. So a lot of stuff is just things that I noticed during the day. Like I know you'll have noticed a lot of the images that I've made so far are really boring things, really. Like when it comes down to, you know, like a cup of tea, a washing machine, you know, like, and they're literally just things that I've been sitting there at my laptop being like, gotta draw something. And it's like, hey, I need to do laundry. Let's make a washing machine out of CSS. So like some of it comes from just things I spot in my day. I try and create something that I feel there's some personal attachment to, even if it's just part of like my day. You know, like when I moved house, I did a house key because I was excited to have like moved home. And I feel like then when I share it, I can add something a bit personal about myself. Some of them are just totally random though, and I don't know where in my head they come from. It's just like, oh, okay, I need to make a UFO today. Okay.
Well, we're happy that we have these ideas. But what was your favorite art so far?
Oh, it's really hard because sometimes I gravitate towards just the last thing that I did. But I think overall, the washing machine I mentioned, I kind of love the washing machine because it's really simple. Like the CSS involved is very, very simple. Like it's one of my earlier efforts, but I think it's really effective. And so it brings me like a lot of joy to see like, yeah, that worked.
Okay, I'm not going to ask you what is your least favorite one, but I know, no, I'm not going to ask you, but I know that once you have to put out a new design every day, you don't really have too much time to dwell on each one or to go back and improve the old ones. So is there something that you think that you could have done better if it wasn't a part of this project?
Yes, yes, so many things. So I think that is a big part of the challenge, and it's a blessing and a curse because on the positive side, like it really like it's challenged a lot of perfectionist tendencies in myself as well. Like, you know, sometimes good enough is good enough, you know, and like that's true in professional code as well. Like sometimes you just have to ship it. But at the same time, it's very painful when you like you just really want to add something else. And sometimes I do go back and fix things because after I post it, I'm like, oh, I hate it.
Do you have any specific examples in mind?
Uh, yeah. Well, there was one that I did was like it's like a cheeseburger. And like I've left up both versions on my Twitter because I feel like it's important to learn in public and like to not claim to be perfect. So like I made it and I was like, yeah, done, cool, boom, post it. And then I looked back at it and I was like, no, the proportions are all wrong. Like it's too wide, it's not tall enough. Like I wouldn't eat this burger, you know, like, so I had to go back and fix it because it was just bothering me too much. But like I say, I leave up both versions because I do think I don't want to pretend that like it's really easy for me like within a short space of time to churn out these pictures because it's not easy. Like the challenge is part of the fun.
And after so many different designs, different animations, what was the biggest thing you learned from writing so much CSS?
I learned a lot really quickly, I think. Like those first couple of weeks were like a really steep learning curve. And I think the main things that I took away was like how to look at pictures and see the shapes, like before you actually get to the code, and like I guess to sort of train my brain into what shapes are possible in CSS, like with minimal effort. You know, things like curved edges, using like box shadows, like inset shadows, like all of these sort of like masking tricks you can use with clip path and things. Like that was quite a big learning curve because those aren't things that I need in my normal job. Like, so I work for a financial company. They don't need me to create very many pretty things, mostly just functional. So these were all like some of these CSS properties I just never even used before. So yeah, definitely identifying shapes and especially things like box shadow and clip path.
What's the reactions you get to this project? And I'm interested to know, do you feel like you're getting different reactions from CSS developers compared to other developers? Because you said earlier that CSS has like a bad rep in the development world. So I'm wondering if you get different reactions.
It's hard for me to tell because I don't always know what people's backgrounds are when they do comment. I think CSS, it has like a very devoted following. The people who love it really love it. And I think things like CodePen, I know you're speaking to Chris Carr before, like developed this really great community of people who are passionate about this kind of thing. And I feel that, you know, and that's been like a big part of my motivation on this journey, is because I feel like the people want you to succeed. And like, you know, when you do get feedback from people, they're making polite suggestions and they're like, maybe you could try this, maybe you could do this, or that's great. And like, that's really cool. And then at the same time, I'm not gonna lie, I've had a few reply guys, you know, he'll send me a message on Twitter or something and just be like, yeah, you should have used this, or you should have actually done that. And I'm like, it's art, you know, I'll do what I want. So I'm an artist now, you know?
Yeah.
I will add it. I think sometimes developers in general, I think there is a problem that some of the developers are not not all of them, that they not know how to act with other peoples, and they don't know how to say always the good things. And sometimes it's a problem that we see in the developers world. I think. But of course, there's a lot of people that love to see all these amazing jobs that you are doing, of course. It's really amazing to see it. And like we talked in the beginning, I saw that there is now in the last years a lot of CSS girls developers that doing so many amazing things. Before the show, I saw my Twitter and saw all those amazing stuff like amazing other developers girls doing now, and it's really inspiring me to see all this stuff. It's really amazing to see it. Really amazing.
Yeah, and I do feel like, you know, I'm saying, you know, a few people are like, oh, you should have done it this way. But, you know, I have to bear in mind all of this is online and people don't always mean it the way it sounds, you know. But I think like the vast majority of responses I've had are from people who use CodePen a lot. And so there are people who are interested in this kind of thing and, you know, especially interested in CSS. And so it's been really positive and supportive. You know, I've had a lot of like good suggestions as well. It's not that I wouldn't ever want everyone just to be like, yeah, everything you do is awesome, you know, like it's nice, but like you want to grow as well. So like I really appreciate when people do reach out and they say like, oh, you know, this doesn't work on this browser, but if you try this property, then it should, give it a go. And it's like, oh, that's awesome, you know, like that giving people a helping hand is really cool. It's nice.
I need to mention that I actually tried a few years back to do a 100 days project, and I quit after a week because I'm a loser. But do you have any tips or advice for developers who are thinking of starting a long-term project like what you're doing?
Yeah, make sure that you have a small thing that you're doing every day. Like, I mean, I'm not surprised that, you know, you faded off of your 100 days project because it's a really long time. I feel like I didn't appreciate this at all. Like 100 days is like, what, it's a quarter of a year or something, a third of a year. It's a lot. It's a lot. And I think I was quite lucky that what I picked to do was in some ways quite vague, you know, like I wasn't setting out to do 100 pictures of animals or 100 animations. Like, so I do have the flexibility to be tired and put up something really simple. But I do see a lot of people doing like 100 days of code, and they have these really big ambitions. You know, I'm going to ship a feature every day to my project. And it's like, really, that's quite a lot. And you want to be able to enjoy it as well. So I'd say, like, look at the project you want to do, and then try and find the smallest possible component of that and commit to that. It would be much more sustainable.
So again, after writing so much CSS, what about CSS did you learn to love the most, and what did you started to hate the most following that project?
Oh, that's good. I guess one of the things that I started using a lot more and loving was like using variables, CSS properties, and scoping them. You know, like it took me a while to figure out that I don't have to declare all of my colors at the root of the CSS. You know, I can like change it per selector, and like that was really powerful. And like I had a lot of fun doing things with that. You know, like having different flowers and like changing the color of the variable in each selector. Like that was really cool, and I like that.
Are you
I don't know
using
what I
using say, SCSS or some kind of preprocessor, or just
just using CSS. Like, so I'm not using any preprocessors for this project as much as I am now seeing the benefits, because I guess on the flip side, you know, the frustration is like I've committed to not using the preprocessor, and there's some things where, like, say I want to create 30 of something and position them in different places, you know, I'm just not going to do that in this project, because to do that with just pure HTML and CSS would take a lot of effort, I think. Whereas if I was using, say, Pug or like Sass as well, like I could do that a lot easier. But I'm trying to stay true to the original project.
good that you're staying true for CSS? I love CSS as pure as it is.
Pure CSS all the way.
I normally ask people what selector or property do they miss the most in CSS, but I'm gonna ask you, what selector or property did you miss the most while doing this project? Because the common answer is parent selector, but I think that for drawing with CSS and CSS animation, there may be some more relevant properties.
Yeah, I don't know. My needs are simple.
I've got like 5 in my head.
Oh yeah. I think it might be one of these things. I don't know what I miss until I know that I'm missing it, you know? I think I feel quite satisfied with CSS. I feel like any limitation is actually helping me direct my efforts a little bit more. I'm curious to know what you think would come in handy, though.
Well, Elad, you want to say what you're missing in CSS animations?
In responsive design, I miss a media query for containers and not for all the web page. I think one of the most missing stuff in the CSS, but it's my perspective because I love responsive design.
It's actually in the specs, by the way, element queries. But like, yes. I'm missing those small things like negative border radius. You know, like we have border radius that goes like this. I want them to go like that.
Yeah, that would be so nice.
And one thing that I'm always missing for years, and I'm actually working on a project about it, is elastic ease. Because you can do elastic ease with the different libraries, but there's nothing with native CSS. So there's like a lot of things that when you do animations, I want them to be a part of CSS.
Yeah.
But let's talk, after this project will be over, what's next? What are you going to do to fill the void?
I'm going to learn all the other things that I could have been using. So I'm kind of looking forward to, I'm going to have to really develop a plan for myself, because at the moment I just want to learn everything. You know, I want to start doing animations with like Grinsock. I want to get back into using preprocessors, using Sass. I've seen some amazing generative art that I'm really curious about getting into. So I think what will be difficult for me is choosing what thing to explore first. But definitely I think animation would be something I'd like to get more into and like maybe explore some libraries for as well, because the animations I've done so far are all very simple, because I just feel like I don't have the time to like upskill enough to make them really good. So yeah.
Well, maybe instead of doing one animation a day, do one a week, so we have more time.
Yeah, I think that would be cool.
You mentioned earlier your day job. What percentage of your time, in average, do you spend on CSS compared to everything else?
What, in my day job?
Yeah.
Yeah, not a lot actually, not a lot. So in my job at the moment, we're using style components. So I kind of really have missed, since starting this job, like actually working with like properly cascading styles. I've missed that. And you know, our styling needs are not too high where I am just now. You know, we're a financial company, so we do a lot of forms, we do a lot of graphs that we use a library for. So there's not a high demand of me for CSS, which I guess is why I wanted to have this little like extra thing on the side to challenge me more.
Do you think this project is improving your coding skills, not just in CSS?
Yeah, for sure. I think good CSS skills sort of bleed into every part of development, to be honest, like everything from the basics of sort of understanding the cascade and how that works a little bit better, to things like if I need to position a div, I got it sorted now, you know, like, whereas, you know, it used to be like, oh, which flex property is this? Or, you know, how do I get these corners that I want on this box? Like that stuff's sort of second nature. And, you know, I mentioned we work with graphs a lot, but we do a little bit of, you know, things that aren't really graphs, but just sort of like helper visualizations, you know, things like thermometer indicators with circles at the end, you know, things like that. And that kind of thing, yeah, I'm doing a lot faster than before, you know, stuff like knowing how to do linear gradients properly and like all of this, really, really helpful.
Great. Elad, you've got any more questions about the project?
I want to add for the things that you said. I think CSS, if you don't think how that it will be clear and readable, it can get very messy very quickly. And I think when you learn how to use CSS in a very clearly way, you may be getting a lot more organized in all the other languages that you have. And yeah. I think this is the things that people maybe don't understand. But this is for the CSS lovers. I don't think most of the web developer in the world love CSS. And we love CSS. You need to know. I'm a CSS developer in my mindset. This is what I'm doing in my day job, usually.
I think you're dead right. I think like if you can understand how to name and organize your CSS, that's just exactly how your brain needs to work for every other part of code as well. So definitely helpful.
What do you recommend? I will say this for all the girls, because you were really doing amazing stuff in the world now. I really, like I said before, a lot of amazing women in all the world that doing all this amazing stuff and all this. How do you want to tell them to start all this project? What do you want to tell them to inspire them to do things like you're doing? You know, everybody thinks that this is only people that doing it a lot of years, and I'm 15 years web developers, and to do drawing for me it's hard because I'm doing other stuff in CSS. Yeah. And how you inspire this all those women in the world that they will start? They don't need to be a lot of years developers. You can do it from start, I think.
Yeah, I feel like the best thing that people in my kind of position can do, you know, especially people like myself who are sort of midlife career changers as well, you know, I'm not even a long-term programmer at all, like, you know, it's just to talk about our stories. So, you know, I blog a lot on the dev platform, and, you know, since I've gotten into CSS Art, I've started sharing the things I've learned and sharing tutorials, and You know, I try to be really clear, like, because sometimes when people share tutorials, they're doing it from a position of being an expert, you know, and like that's very much the vibe of that post, and that's cool. And there's definitely a need for that. But I feel like what I can contribute at the moment is like, hey, I'm not an expert, and look what I managed to do, you know, like when I started this project, I mean, I could use CSS. Of course, I could have been working on production code for a long time, I guess, but I never made CSS art, and I hadn't really done much with animation at all. So like, I try and be really clear when I'm like talking and writing articles, you know, this isn't magic, you know, it's just a lot of patience and trial and error and genuine interest. And I think as long as somebody wants to do something, they can noodle around in a code pen and they can make something pretty cool. Like, and I just would try and share that story with people, I guess, to answer your question, to motivate them.
I think I can add for what you say, and I'm doing it a lot in my real life, because sometimes I'm not good at in something in CSS. There is a lot of stuff in CSS. People don't understand that CSS is a huge thing in 2020. And sometimes I want to be good in responsive images, and I don't know almost anything. And then I start learning, and I write an article that all the people in the world started to read it. And only because that I decided to learn it, to write it, you get into be expert in that thing. And I think this is the one most amazing. You don't get expert when you're starting to do it, but you get expert while you're doing it.
Yes.
All the people in the world are usual people. They're not magics, like you said.
It's true. It's true. And I do think writing about it, like you say, you know, like, so yeah, you just had to learn something, write it down, because everyone's perspective is unique. And just because there's 10 other articles about it doesn't mean that yours isn't the one that's going to click with somebody. So.
And sometimes you can explain it in a better way, and you will get a better privilege because you write it like a people that can read it and understand it in a better way. And this this way, everybody can write it in other perspective that give others, web developers, the possibility to understand it better, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Give people the choice to find the voice that like resonates with them, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Let's talk about web accessibility. You started a website with tutorials and resources for developers all about web accessibility. Can you tell us about that, how it began, and what's your connection with web accessibility?
Yeah. So my site is called Up Your Alley, or Up Your A11Y, which is the short form for accessibility. I started that, I think it's just over a year ago now. And that was kind of spurred on by like a bit of a journey I've been on in tech, where, you know, I came through a sort of boot camp system, education, where, to be honest, I don't really recall accessibility really being talked about. And then I went on to work for an agency who worked with like a lot of quite high profile national brands in the UK, you know, who had very strong accessibility requirements, you know. And I kind of had the good fortune for myself to be put on a project with one of those clients who had really strong demands for making their app accessible. And I realized that it wasn't just me as a newbie in the office who didn't really know what that meant. It was everyone, you know, like senior developers as well. And I guess the more that I looked into it and the more I started talking to people about this, I realized that we have a bit of a problem in tech, that like we have a lot of senior and mid-level and all levels of developers who don't really understand how people use the apps that we make. And, you know, that sort of obviously led me down this rabbit hole of like, okay, so how can I communicate to people some of the basics that we need to know, and some of the, you know, bare minimum things that we can do easily and quickly to make these experiences better for more people. And yeah, Up Your Alley, the site actually started as a lunch and learn session for my colleagues. So it started off as like a sort of whistle-stop tour of here's about 10 things that we can do to make our React apps more accessible, and we should just do them now. every project. And then someone was like, you should write that down. And I was like, okay. And then eventually Up Your Alley was born. And, you know, I have a lot of hopes for that site to be expanded. You know, a lot of what's there at the moment is React specific, or it's sort of very basic HTML stuff that we should all know, but we forget. And sometimes people like me who come through boot camps maybe weren't told at all. But I'd love to add a lot more about how JavaScript can help some interactions, you know, for things like accessible dropdowns and so on. And I'd also love to see more frameworks represented in there. So I'm hoping that eventually I can get my act together. And it is open source, but it's open source in that half-hearted way that I haven't really put up much guidelines of how people can contribute. So that's, after the 100 Days project is over, that's going to be my focus, to hopefully draw some more expertise into the project.
I actually agree with what you said. For me, for example, I'm not an expert about accessibility, not at all. But I actually learned a lot these past few days while working on my style stage design. Stephanie, who builds style stage, put a lot of emphasis on accessible design and semantic markup, fallbacks, and so on. But from your experience, what is the most important thing that web developers, and maybe CSS developers in particular, should know about accessibility?
Yeah, I mean, I might address that in two parts. So I guess for web developers generally, I think keep it simple and use semantic HTML because amazingly enough, like you can make a huge improvement to the usability of your web apps just by using the HTML that we're given. You know, things like if you have a list of things on a page, code them as a list, which sounds so basic, but we don't do it. And we don't do it because it's ableism, kind of, you know, like if I can see really well, I just don't think about it in that way. I just think, oh, I want a bunch of divs on a page, blah, 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 wash them out. And it is engaging that part of your brain that's like, hey, actually, there's an HTML element for that. So bin the div whenever you can. I think anytime you write a div, just try and make it not a div. See if there's something more appropriate.
That's a good advice.
Yeah, always think twice before a div. And on the CSS side, I think one of the biggest things that we can do is just respect user preferences as much as we can. So things like using relative units for font size. You know, I've seen some horrific things in projects where people are sort of hard coding every font as just, you know, a fixed pixel size. And one simple thing we can do to help like quite a huge set of users, you know, it's not just people who have visual impairments who use that feature, like to bump up the font size in their browser, like lots of people do it, you know, is to use like rem units to make sure it scales properly. And, you know, things like, you know, if you get really into animations and things, to think about prefers reduced motion queries so that we're not alienating a bunch of users who maybe have vertigo or some other condition that when they see these moving animations, it makes them feel sick and they have to leave our site. So I think, yeah, on the CSS side, definitely like thinking about working with the browser settings as much as we can.
And let's forget about the development side for a second. A lot of clients sadly don't understand the need for accessible design. Me personally, I heard from a lot of clients that they don't care about accessibility, even if it's just because of the extra time it will add to the development process and the QA side of it. How do you suggest developers to explain the importance of accessible design to their clients?
Yeah, that's a question I get a lot because, like you say, unfortunately, that is the landscape that we're working in. You know, you can't rely on, you know, if you have a client, you can't rely on them being ethically minded. I guess you'd have to, I would gauge it client by client and try and appeal to them. So in the UK, certainly, I would look at appealing to them on the basis of risk. And by risk, I mean both legally and in terms of their brand. So you'll see like there's an increase in lawsuits against websites for not being accessible. You know, if you're actively excluding users, then in most countries it's not okay. You know, like in the EU we have you know, the Equality Acts, and in America you have the ADA. You know, it's not legal to exclude people through poor coding practices. Sometimes working with the client, they are more brand minded. So maybe they think the risk to them is low because maybe they have a small user base, but they are hoping to build a big brand. And I'd say that if somebody starts complaining about the accessibility of your page, you know, hey, my daughter's visually impaired, she can't register for this school program because you decided to not code it properly. You know, it's incredibly damaging for a brand. And you see that happening a lot at the moment as well. Like I know recently on Twitter, there's this big thing about Ravelry, which is like I think it's a site for sharing patterns for knitting. I'm not entirely sure what they do, but I know a lot of people are very upset at them because they're not taking the steps to fix their accessibility, which is excluding a lot of their user base, and they'll just go somewhere else. You know, like these people are organizing on Twitter to take their business elsewhere, and that's what will happen. So I think the risk, both in terms of legal risk, but also the brand risk is what I would highlight to them. And also, I think as a developer, we're kind of well positioned to advocate from the point of view that this isn't like an extra feature that we're asking a client to pay for. This is just giving us the time to write good code, and good code is going to be more sustainable in the future as well. You know, I always give the analogy of like, you don't buy a premise for a bookshop, like a building for a bookshop that's on the ground floor, and then make all your clients come in through like the chimney on the roof, you know, like HTML and CSS, JavaScript, they're all perfectly capable of creating these accessible experiences. There's no need for us to force people through this horrible user experience.
Great, great advice. Elad, any final questions?
You are a full front-end developer. You're doing JavaScript, CSS, HTML. Of course, you're doing everything. And I see your passion to CSS and HTML, accessibility, semantic HTML. Do you think in the future you will move more to the CSS development and less for the JavaScript?
Oh, I don't know, maybe. I wouldn't really, I certainly, I've been really enjoying this project because, you know, like I was saying earlier, I've not really had a chance to sort of fly in CSS, you know, so I've been learning a lot, and the more I use it, the more I enjoy it. And I do wonder if I start playing with these like nice preprocessors and things as well. I don't know if I'll get drawn more towards CSS, but I mean, the three combined, you know, I just love all the front end. At the end of the day, I just really like creating experiences that people are going to interact with, like whether they're visual and whether they're CSS, whether they're JavaScript based. To me, what matters is creating something that just behaves nice. You know, that feeling you get when you like use an app, and you know, the little micro interactions, they just make you feel good, and that's what motivates me.
Absolutely. The things that you're doing, and you know that people is using it in the real world.
Yeah.
It's nice to feel it.
Yeah, for sure.
No, this is my question. I mean, I finished.
Great. So, Susan, I just want to thank you for talking with us today. It was a pleasure. Any final words?
Well, just thank you for having me. It's, you know, really great to come on and be able to discuss all things CSS and accessibility with you. And I guess if anyone is sort of watching this later and is wondering if they can do these pieces of art or they can make an improvement in accessibility in your code base, yes, you definitely can, because if I can, you definitely can.
So thank you all for watching. We'll be here next time, still talking about CSS, but with a different person. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Suzanne.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.